Night Sinal. WKRN 89.3 FM was the only radio station that still came in clearly in Porter's Mill. Most frequencies just picked up static, thanks to the mountains that surrounded our little town. But WKRN always had perfect reception, especially at night. Crystal clear audio, no matter where you were. That should have been our first warning. I worked the night shift at the gas station on Route 43, and WKRN was my only company. During the day, it played the usual small-town mix, country music, local news, high school football games. But after midnight, it switched to The Late Show with Dr. Silence. Dr. Silence had the smoothest voice I'd ever heard. Deep, calming, almost hypnotic. He played obscure jazz and took calls from insomniacs, lonely truckers, and night shift workers like me. But sometimes, the calls were different. It started with little things. Callers describing dreams they were having while they were still awake. Others report lost time, hours vanishing while they listened to the show. One night, a trucker called in saying he'd been driving the same stretch of Route 43 for 6 hours, passing our gas station again and again, but couldn't seem to leave town. I saw his truck that night, passing by every 15 minutes like clockwork. The driver looked straight ahead, his eyes wide and unblinking, his hands locked on the wheel. More strange calls followed. People describing things they saw in their headlights, shapes that couldn't exist, colors that shouldn't be possible. Dr. Silence would just chuckle, his voice like warm honey, and say, "Keep listening, friend. The night is still young." Then came the request hour. Listeners would call in asking for songs I'd never heard of, with titles that made my skin crawl: The Melody Between Heartbeats, Symphony in Dead Frequencies, The Sound Stars Make When No One's Listening. After hearing the trucker's story, I started paying attention to my surroundings. Cars stopped longer than usual at the pumps. Customers seemed distracted, some muttering to themselves in a strange, rhythmic cadence. Once, a woman came in to buy cigarettes, but when I handed her the pack, she didn't take it. She just stood there, staring at the radio behind the counter, her lips moving in sync with the static. I started researching WKRN. The station's license had expired in 1973. The building it supposedly broadcast from had burned down in 1975. But the signal never stopped. One night, a caller asked Dr. Silence how long he'd been on the air. He laughed, a sound that made my teeth ache, and said, "Time is different on this frequency, friend. We've been broadcasting since before there was radio, before there was sound, before there was night filled with music." That's when I noticed the music was changing me. I could hear layers in it that shouldn't exist, sounds that made geometric patterns in my mind, melodies that folded space and time. I started seeing things in the gas station mirrors, customers whose reflections moved a few seconds after they did, people walking backwards through time, shadows that cast people. Dr. Silence's voice got clearer too. I could hear other voices behind it now, thousands of them, all talking at once in languages that human vocal cords couldn't produce. And the static between songs. It wasn't static at all. One night, around 3 a.m., a man entered the gas station. He was wearing an old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd see in black and white photos, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He walked straight to the radio and turned the volume up. "You shouldn't be listening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned to me. His face was pale, almost waxy, and his eyes, they weren't glowing embers like I first thought. They were blank, reflecting static. "It's not about the listening," he replied. "It's about the hearing." He tipped his hat and left, but I never saw him cross the parking lot. Last night, Dr. Silence announced a special show. "Tonight, listeners, we're going to play a symphony that will tune your frequencies to ours. Don't adjust your dials. Don't try to turn off your radios. Just listen, and let the music adjust your wavelength." I watched through the gas station window as every car on Route 43 stopped. Every radio turned itself to 89.3. Every person sat, staring at their dials, as that impossible music began to play. The sound was alive. It crawled into my ears and nested in my mind. I could feel it rearranging me, pulling me into sync with something vast and incomprehensible. I'm writing this as a warning. If you're driving through Porter's Mill late at night, and your radio suddenly picks up WKRN, don't listen. Don't let Dr. Silence's voice lull you in. Because the station isn't broadcasting music anymore. It's tuning us, like instruments, preparing us to play in some cosmic symphony. And whatever's conducting, it's almost ready for the performance to begin. 4 weeks after the special broadcast, WKRN's influence deepened. It wasn't just Porter's Mill anymore. Nearby towns began to report similar phenomena. Stalled cars, inexplicable static overtaking every station, and missing persons who were last seen listening to their radios. I tried to quit my job at the gas station, but it felt impossible. Every time I thought about leaving, my body betrayed me. My legs refused to carry me to my car, my hand couldn't write a resignation letter, and my voice would fail when I picked up the phone to call my boss. The station wanted me there. The music wanted me. Late one night, as I restocked shelves, the air inside the gas station grew heavy, almost liquid. It pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, the radio crackled to life on its own. Dr. Silence's voice oozed through the speakers, but he wasn't addressing the callers this time. He was speaking directly to me. "You've been a faithful listener, friend," he said. "But the next step requires more than just ears. Are you ready to see the music?" The mirrors in the gas station flickered. For a moment, they weren't reflecting the store. Instead, I saw a vast, endless void filled with swirling light and sound. In the center of it all was a figure, silhouetted against the chaos, conducting an orchestra of things that shouldn't exist. As the vision faded, a man stumbled into the station. He was pale, his clothes torn and filthy, and his eyes darted around like he was looking for something invisible. "It didn't take," he muttered. "I didn't tune right." Before I could ask what he meant, he collapsed. His body convulsed, and his veins darkened, spreading like ink beneath his skin. The radio crackled again, and Dr. Silence spoke. "Not everyone can handle the harmony." The man's body dissolved into static. Dr. Silence's request hour became more interactive. Callers no longer asked for songs by name. They hummed melodies, sang disjointed notes, or simply breathed into the receiver. Somehow, these incomplete sounds wove together into haunting, impossible compositions that filled the station. One night, I heard my own voice on the broadcast. It was a recording of me humming absent-mindedly at work, distorted and layered into the music. The realization hit me: the station wasn't just broadcasting to us. It was recording us, gathering fragments of our souls to build its symphony. The air in Porter's Mill felt different after that night. Time seemed slower, almost syrupy. People moved like they were underwater, their eyes distant, their ears always tuned to something only they could hear. The radio station became omnipresent. You didn't need a device to hear it anymore. It was in the hum of streetlights, the rhythm of footsteps, even the breeze through the trees. And Dr. Silence's voice was always there, whispering fragments of his masterpiece. Then, at precisely 3:33 a.m., the power across the town failed. Every light, every device, everything, except for the radios. The music that followed was unlike anything before. It wasn't sound, it was sensation. I could feel it in my bones, vibrating, reshaping me. I wasn't alone. Outside the gas station, people gathered in the streets, moving in sync to the rhythm. Their bodies jerked and twisted as though they were marionettes pulled by unseen strings. Dr. Silence spoke again, his voice layered with countless others. "The conductor is here. Prepare yourselves, listeners. Tonight, the symphony begins." The sky above Porter's Mill split open, not with light, but with sound. Waves of frequency rippled through the air, bending reality itself. From the rift stepped the conductor. It wasn't a person, it was a towering figure of shimmering static, its form constantly shifting, as if it couldn't quite settle on a single shape. In its hand, it held a baton made of light and shadow. With a single movement, the music shifted, and the people around me dropped to their knees, their faces contorted in bliss or agony. I couldn't tell which. I felt myself slipping, my body swaying to the impossible rhythm. But something in me resisted. The memories of what life used to be, the mundane, the ordinary, anchored me. I turned off the radio, smashing it against the counter. The conductor paused, its faceless head turning toward the gas station. Dr. Silence's voice boomed, now directly in my head. "Your defiance is futile. You are part of the symphony." But I wasn't. Not yet. I grabbed the strange warped tape I'd been recording my observations on, a relic from the station that I had hoped would make sense of everything. It felt alive, vibrating with the station's energy. I slammed the tape into the player and pressed play. The sound that emerged was raw, discordant, jagged notes and broken rhythms. It wasn't harmony, it was chaos. And it fought back. The conductor recoiled, its form flickering. The music from the station faltered, and the people around me stopped moving. For the first time, silence began to creep into the town. But silence was no escape. The void it left behind was worse, a deafening absence that threatened to consume everything. I realized the tape wasn't a solution, it was a temporary disruption. The conductor raised its baton one final time, and the rift above the town began to collapse inward, dragging everything with it. I don't remember how I escaped, or if I truly did. I woke up miles away, the radio silent for the first time in years. Porter's Mill was gone, swallowed by the music. Now, I travel from town to town, warning people. But every so often, I hear it again, the faint hum of WKRN 89.3 FM, calling to me. The symphony isn't over. It's just waiting for its next conductor.